Professor Takahashi and Professor Yamamoto, thank you very much for joining us today with us. Professor Takahashi, in the past 6 months, you've been to Iraq, Iran, and Jordan for surveys. And by actually visiting the countries and speaking with the local people, do you sense any changes in Islamic countries in the Middle East since the terror attacks on September 11th?
Yes. First of all, many people in the Middle East felt sympathy towards the victims of the terrorism on 9/11. And secondly, they felt embarrassment because terrorists were actually Muslims. And under the name of Islam, such atrocity was committed. So they were embarrassed and they were confused. Why would Muslims behave like that? But that sympathy has been turning into frustration and hostility, because what the Israelis are doing in Palestine is simply not acceptable to many Muslims in the Arab and they feel the United States is behind Israel. That's why Israel is committing so much atrocities in Palestine. So sympathy has been changing into hostility towards the United States.
And how do people in the Middle East react to the United States attacks against Afghanistan?
Well, it depends on the country you've been to. Attack on Taliban is one particular interpretation of Islam. And like Iranians who do not like Taliban, they said it's okay. I mean, Taliban are terrible people. They disgrace the name of Islam. So they accepted that. But of course, they're Muslims nevertheless. So they're not that happy to see so many Afghans being killed by Americans. So it's a conflicting sense of resentment.
And Professor Yamamoto, it seems that the United States has changed its attitude after taking measures in its war against terror. What do you think about this?
In my view, fundamentally, the United States' basic ground strategy of anti-terrorism or counter-proliferation is not changed even since after the September 11th. But recently, U.S., especially the Bush administration, changed its attitude a little bit towards the Middle East, and other so-called rogue states like Iran and North Korea in terms of anti-terrorism and counter-proliferation so far.
So does that mean the relationships between the United States and the Islamic countries in the region will be more tense?
More tense, particularly because after September 11th, U.S. anti-Iraq attitude in terms of weapons of mass destruction proliferation in the soil of Iraq, the United States have become very, very sensitive to certain attempts of Iraqi government to develop certain sophisticated nuclear weapons, especially nuclear weapons and biochemical weapons systems. So.
And Professor Takahashi, what do you think?
Yes, I think definitely we are entering into a period of tension between the United States and the Middle Eastern countries. There are a couple of reasons. Let me pick up the example of Iran. Iran cooperated with the United States in its war against Taliban. It closed its border with Afghanistan. It notified the United States in case of the U.S. pilots were shot down and landed in Iran would protect them. So Iranians cooperated with the United States. However, after the war, American position, the attitude towards Iran has been rather harsh. And many Iranians asking, why did we cooperate with the United States? Is this the treatment we got for cooperating in the war efforts in Afghanistan? And also, the United States is threatening to use force against Iraq because it is not abiding by the UN Security Council resolution about weapons of mass destruction. We all know that, but lots of people in the Middle East ask, Iraq is violating that, but how about Israel? Israel has been violating numerous resolutions, and nobody has done anything against Israel. Why us? Yeah, why us? Why should they pick up Iraq? That's the attitude. So it's going to be a very tense period.
So it's going to be very tense. And also, European nations have ties with those Islamic countries in the Middle East. And how about the relationships between the European nations and the Islamic countries?
Well, Europeans have been taking a little bit more flexible attitude. In case of Iran, Europeans are expressing their concern about human rights observance, but at the same time they're talking about investment in Iran, trade with Iran. So Europeans are not that, go it alone, tough approach, unlike the United States. And one has to keep in mind that Europe is also an Islamic continent. Britain has a huge Muslim population. Germany has a huge Muslim population. So does France. And they are more sensitive to the sentiment of Muslim people.
And Professor Yamamoto, do you agree with Professor Takahashi?
Yes, fundamentally I agree with you. But in another context, I disagree with him, particularly in case of Iran, particularly the United States is very, very sensitive to the development of nuclear weapons. On the other hand, the European countries has not so, heavy sensitivity vis-a-vis the Iranian development of nuclear power plant, not nuclear weapons. As well as the Russian government energetically support Iranians plant generations program. So far, a little bit different from European countries, from country to country, and from European countries to Russia, and from European country to the United States. So far, there are some discrepancies in attitude toward Iran among the Western European countries, including the United States and Russia.
And how about Japan? How about Japan's attitudes toward the Middle Eastern countries?
Japan has not so, large political interest with the Middle East countries. So far, a little bit insensitive toward such Middle Eastern affairs, in my view. But Japan has largely has been dependent on the Middle Eastern oil resources or natural gas resources. So far, we have to be rather more sensitive about the Middle Eastern affairs than ever before.
And Professor Takahashi, how about Japan's attitudes toward the Middle Eastern countries?
Well, fundamentally, Japan and the Middle Eastern countries are complementary in economic terms. They want to sell their oil, we want to buy their oil. And so there's no political issues between Japan and the Middle Eastern countries. The only country that Japan is really considering seriously is Iran, because Iran is perceived as a scene of contest between reformists and conservatives now. And the Japanese government wants to help the reformists. But the United States argue that no, there are no reformists in Iran. They are both sides of the same coin called Islamic radicals. And so we have no problem with the Middle Eastern countries, but we have problem with the American policy towards Iran.
Now, the United States has been paying attention to Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, labeling these countries as an axis of evil. And now, as you mentioned earlier in this interview, it's been said that the United States is making preparations for attacks on Iraq. And Professor Takahashi, how are the people in the Middle East reacting to such a move by the United States?
Well, essentially, they are scared. This is what happened in Afghanistan. And the Iraqis are really scared. I was invited by the government of Iraq in June. Why should they invite me? They want their opinions heard all over the world. So they are now inviting lots of journalists, scholars, researchers to make their voice heard. And they are scared. And the neighboring countries are scared as well, particularly Iran. Iran was branded as one of the vulnerable members of the axis of evils. And for traditionally Iran and Iraq are mutual enemies. So U.S. bombing of Iraq in the short term benefits Iranian security. But in the long run, Iranians are afraid if it's all right to attack Iraq for any reasons of American choosing, then why not Iran next? After Iraq, the United States might say, we don't like your policy. And U.S. might be claimed to be justified in attacking Iran. So Iranians are scared as well. And neighboring countries, other countries like Saudi Arabia or Turkey are scared as well, because United States has a plan to attack Iraq, but no plan to reconstruct Iraq. In a sense, post-Saddam Hussein Iraq, there's no scenario presented. So many neighboring countries are afraid the chaos in Iraq, and that's going to be messy.
And Professor Yamamoto, how about the reactions among the American people about the President Bush move that it is said that they're preparing to attack Iraq?
Before about that, I certainly want to stress that, when Bush administration labeled the three countries as the axis of federal axis, such, rhetoric is quite similar with the Reagan administration's every empire to the former Soviet Union in the 1980s. Such rhetoric has been used in order to mobilize the American entrenchment toward new enemy and new target of attack in the case of war, like the Persian Gulf War, etc., etc. So we have to be careful about such using rhetoric and be involved in such rhetoric. So far, it's quite important for the Japanese and other Asian countries to be not sensitive about such using rhetoric. Thank you.
So it is essential for the United States to have the understanding and cooperation of surrounding nations in order to attack Iraq, as Professor Takahashi touched upon, but especially Saudi Arabia, which has much influence in the region, hosts U.S. military base in the country and has cooperated with the United States and seems to have changed its attitude recently. And how do you analyze the situation?
Yes, one has to remember Osama bin Laden is a former Saudi citizen. He was born and brought up in Saudi Arabia. Apparently, there's no public opinion survey in Saudi Arabia, but the United States is becoming increasingly unpopular. For example, now Saudi Arabia is importing cola from Iran. They stopped drinking, apparently, American cola. That's the extent of the unpopularity that the United States is experiencing in Saudi Arabia. And given that public opinion, the government of Saudi Arabia is very reluctant to support the United States in public. So we don't know if the United States should decide to attack Iraq. Saudi government might say no in public, but say yes in private. We don't know, but Saudi government is agonizing through this choice of either support the United States or not. And also on the part of the United States, there is a resentment against Saudi Arabia. So many of the hijackers were Saudi citizens, and the United States has been protecting the Saudi royal family, and now the United States wants Saudi Arabian bases in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabian government in public is saying no. And so Americans are very upset about that. So Saudi-American relation is going through a very difficult period. But let me remind you, we talk about the war scenario against Iraq. Depends on what kind of war the United States will wage against Iraq. The United States does not have to use air base in Saudi Arabia. It could be a small-scale special troops type operation like we have seen in Afghanistan. Maybe the U.S. Air Base in Turkey would be enough, or maybe a aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf would be enough. So the United States may be thinking of attacking Iraq without relying on the Saudi Air Base.
And Professor Yamamoto, how should the United States convince or talk with or negotiate with surrounding nations?
Now the Bush administration goes negotiations under the water with the Arabic countries and European countries as a whole. But I'm not sure whether such an underwater diplomacy would be successful or not. Nevertheless, such a negotiation is very, very necessary for the United States to get some support from the international community as a whole. But even so, if the United States finally decided to attack Iraq, the main victim of the air raid by the United States or, the combined air attack by the United States and Britain, the main victims of such an air raid would be, in innocent people. So for such an innocent people, how we should survive such an innocent people. It's our lessons gained from Afghanistan, air raid against Afghanistan from October 7th last year, and other, air raid cases against Bosnia-Herzegovina or Kosovo, etc., etc. There is no air raid against the Western civilized countries, only against such an uncivilized and underdeveloped areas. So for it's a little bit hypothetical attitude by the United States should be problematic in the United Nations or in other places for negotiations, for talks, etc., etc.
Well, of course, the United States is a very strong member of the international community, and after the terror attacks, the United States seems to have become more unilateral. What's its intention? Will the United States give higher priority to its domestic problems than international cooperation?
The United States had the option during these, 5 decades when the United States faced with international difficulties. They finally decided to attack by airbombing and direct invasion towards the enemy soil, etc., etc. Anyways, such an U.S. attitude had been organized by the, such an attacked countries or attacked peoples around the world. So such an unilateralistic attitude should be ended in the eyes of the people outside the United States, but only the American people wanted to such an unilateralistic and hegemonistic attitude toward the concerned areas or concerned states, etc. It's a very big problem in the 21st century, in this new era.
So who can stop the United States?
There is no people or no country to stop such an antagonistic or unilateralistic attitude by the United States.
And Professor Takahashi, what do you think about the attitudes of the United States?
Well, I think U.S. war against Taliban was actually multilateral, widely supported by international community. So for that matter, I disagree with the U.S. has become more unilateral, but on other issues like global warming or trade, the United States seems to be becoming more unilateral, and it seems to be there's an explanation for that. That is, to be unilateral is very popular in the United States. Bush can count on the domestic support, and unfortunately, only the American can vote in American elections, and Japanese, Germans, Afghans don't vote for American elections, and as a politician, I guess he's behaving rationally. And another explanation is that during the Cold War, the United States always has to consider the reaction of the Soviet Union and its allies, but now the United States is a sole superpower, so it feels, I think, it can afford to behave unilaterally. It's unfortunate, but that's the fact.
Is there any country which has a voice against the United States or has an influential voice against the United States?
I think only the American public opinion can stop this unilateralism. So I think it's a long way, but the way to work with is to educate the American public opinion.
And final question for both professors. Professor Yamamoto, which Islamic country in the Middle East will play a key role?
In my eyes, conclusively, I'd like to say that only Egypt is the most, biggest country in the Middle East, have an free hand to build between the Arab countries and the United States and to other Western allies. Saudi Arabia has not such a big, card to bridge build between the Arabic states and the United States. In my opinion, Egypt is only.
And Professor Takahashi.
Well, we are talking about the war against Iraq, so I think Iraq is the key country. If Iraq decides to accept the UN unconditional inspection over the weapons of mass destruction, they can stop the march towards the war.
Will they?
I hope so.
And how about the influence from the European nations?
Well, I think European nations can encourage the Iraqi government that if it can prove that it has given up weapons of mass destruction, the government Saddam Hussein's regime can survive, then I think Saddam might consider accepting the unconditional inspection that the United States demand.
So, Professor Takahashi, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the current situation?
In order to be a student of international politics in the Middle East, you've got to be optimistic.
You've got to be optimistic. So your advice to me is to be optimistic and see what will happen.
Yes.
So I think we have to keep our eyes on the situation in the United States and also in the Middle East as well.